The best measure of strength. I see a lot of videos talking about this. Everyone has different opinions. Um, you know, I don't disagree that the deadlift is a very good metric. It's low skill, it's just brute force, right? And so many people have said the deadlift is the best measure of strength. That seems to be the most common one. I thought about this a little deeper, though. So Dan John, huge fan of Dan John, says that the best measure of strength is weight overhead. So the idea being that whatever you can take from the floor and put overhead is the best measure of strength. And I agree with that as well. Now you may say that, well, not everyone has the technical skill to do a clean and jerk. Sure. But I mean, I'm sure you've seen strongman competitors do, their axle, and they're doing a continental clean and then getting that overhead. I'm sure you've seen people do a variety of different things, where they deadlift the weight up and then, pinch it into their hip and then swing it up to their chest and then eventually get it overhead. So, we could say that weight overhead is the best measure of strength for a variety of reasons. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to snatch it. Who cares what your technique is if the measure is just brute force, brute strength? This isn't figure skating. This isn't gymnastics. There's no score for technique and making it look pretty. If we're just talking about what's the weight on the bar and how much can you put overhead, okay, fair enough. Then I thought about this a little deeper, and this is my answer, but you'll see why my answer is, I'm going to explain to you why. I think the strict overhead press is the best measure of strength. Now, is that because it's just brute force and all? No, stay with me. Is anyone ever going to say that Big Z is weak? Brian Shaw? Mitchell Hooper? Any of these guys for that matter. No, Eddie Hall is brutally strong. What do they all have in common? They all have a huge overhead press. If you have a huge overhead press, even if you just let's just say you can overhead press 100 kilos. If you overhead press 100 kilos, strict overhead press 100 kilos, you can easily back squat that. You can easily deadlift that. And so my metric is actually choosing a lift where you can't move a lot of weight typically. Typically, it takes a very long time for people to develop their overhead press. And any of you out there that are training know that your squat goes up much faster, your deadlift goes up much faster, even your bench press goes up much faster than your overhead press. It takes years and years and years to build your overhead press. You look at any of these linear periodization programs even, let's take starting strength. You're going to squat, deadlift, bench press, and overhead press. Okay. You'll probably put 10 pounds on your bar every week for your squat and your deadlift. You may put 5, maybe 10 pounds on your bench press every week. Your overhead press, you're probably not going to be putting on 10 pounds per week. And as you run a linear periodization program as a beginner, which one of those 4, sorry, not the big 3, we got 4 here because I got the overhead press. Which one of those 4 is going to stall and plateau first? Yeah, the overhead press. You'll still be making progress on your squat. You'll still be making progress on your deadlift, and you'll still be making progress on your bench press. The overhead press is going to be the one that stalls first. Okay. So typically, if you see someone that has a big overhead press, they've been training for a very long time. Okay. And additionally to this is that if you can overhead press 315 pounds, 405 pounds, maybe more, that a person that's able to strict overhead press 405 pounds is able to squat that very easily. That's a lightweight for them to squat, and it's an even easier weight for them to deadlift. And certainly if you can overhead press 405, you can definitely bench press 405. Just like for reference point on overhead press versus bench presses, I can overhead press 225 for 3. It's nothing amazing. Like there are strongman competitors that could probably overhead press that for 50 reps and just simply run out of breath. But when I go to bench press, and I've never taken a bench press to failure, I'll get 17, 18 reps with 225. I don't take it to failure. I don't know. Maybe I could get to 20, but I don't have a spotter, so I don't even take a risk. Just think about the difference there. 225 for 3 overhead, but I can get 18 on a bench press? Right. So it gives you an idea of the relative difference here. You know, if I'm squatting 225 is a warm-up. It's not like if I squat 225 for 3, that's like a warm-up set. If I deadlift 225 for 3, that's really warm-up. I mean, all deadlifts start with 135. What do you do next? Well, you jump to 225. You don't go to, unless, you know, don't get me wrong. I mean, there are beginners out there, and by all means, maybe you jump to 155, and that's your 3-rep max. But, you know, for people who are deadlifting 495 pounds, you know, your first set's 135 for, you know, 10 reps, and then 225. Like, that's a warm-up. So if you're able to overhead press 225, you can easily squat it, you can easily deadlift it. If you can overhead press 405, you can easily squat it, you can easily deadlift it. And so when I thought about this, I decided that the strict overhead press is actually the best measure of strength, not because it's the heaviest, not because it's the most brute force, but because if you see someone with a huge overhead press, you know that they have a good squat and a good deadlift to go along with it, and obviously a good bench press. And so I think that that's the best measure of strength. You know, so when you see Big Z doing these strict overhead presses with absurd amounts of weight that you couldn't even deadlift, yeah, and that's why he can deadlift massive amounts of weight. You know, like when you see Mitchell Hooper or Eddie Hall, yeah, they overhead press massive amounts of weight that are more than most of us can deadlift. And they also have, you know, a deadlift that's near 1,000 pounds or over 1,000 pounds. So, just something to think about there. Sometimes things aren't as straightforward as they seem. You know, you could say mid-thigh pull, you know, that isometric mid-thigh pull is a great measure of strength. Yeah, maybe. But, like, it doesn't tell me anything about, you know, his overall strength. And so I feel like the strict overhead press, because it takes the longest to develop it, and because it tends to be people's weakest lift, measure people on their weakest lift, and then you'll have a pretty good idea of who's strong and who isn't.